All right. Hey, everybody. So we're going to be continuing with setting up Sublime Text to give us feedback about coding style. And where we sort of left off was basically PSR 12 and PSR 2 from the PHP framework interoperability group. Basically says that the static declaration must come after the visibility, right? So basically, visibility has to be there, right? Because this technically is an executable function, right? And by default, if there is no visibility specified, PHP will assume that it is meant to be public, okay? And so what PSR2 or PSR12 says is public or visibility always needs to be there. So public, private, protected always needs to be there. And I completely agree. Been doing that for years. And not only that, but if you have abstract or final, it comes before the rest of the declaration or signature of the function. Okay? But when it comes to static, static is supposed to come after visibility. So this is perfectly okay. Now, for me, as I said before in the other video, this doesn't read well in my brain and doesn't seem to follow the real paradigm that we're trying to establish, which is optional things should go to the edges compared to what's in the center, right? So this, if what's required is the center of this, atom, if you will, then the optional things like arguments as well as other keywords should go out to the edges. And as I said before, I do have a PR in place for trying to make that the actual standard. So with all that said, we need to create our own custom rule for PHP CodeSniffer, right? So PHP CodeSniffer right now is using PSR 12, and we could, one of the things that you can do in CodeSniffer is to go ahead and so we have the rule PSR 12, so that's getting all of PSR 12, and we can say exclude ref, and I can't remember the name, so I'm going to go ahead and go back to the config generator website, and I'm going to say methods. Is it? Here's the bottom PSR 12.1 or 2 should be coming up because that's wrong framework. So PSR 2 is where this class declaration gets presented. So one space between keywords. Keyword must be in the same line as the class name. Only one interface may be specified per line. No. Methods, method declaration. Method name should not be prefixed with an underscore. So that's another thing from PSR2 as well as PSR12. Is we used to do a lot of this underscore stuff, and it used to be as a means to indicate visibility, private versus public. Or in some cases static. So what I need is I need the name for this thing. So let's go ahead and do that. And if we come over here and then save, PSR12 has its own. Which brings us to the wiki. So a lot of projects that I'm aware of don't really use the wiki too much, but this is where the documentation is, and no harm, no foul. But it can be a little difficult for me, at least, to navigate. So exclude, not exclude pattern. Oh, name. Exclude name. There we go. So basically what we're saying is we want the whole of PSR12, but you know what? This one right here, never mind. And so we can turn it off easily that way, but that doesn't give other developers who are developing inside of this package or inside of this class the knowledge that that's a rule we want to follow. So what we have to do here is, and that's why we have to create the new sniff. So if we go to the coding standard tutorial, basically what you do is you actually create your own standard. Okay, you can't, or I can't, maybe there is a way to do it and I just don't know, you can't create your own rule. Just standalone rule like, hey, reference this. And I did have a conversation with somebody about that. So basically what we need to do is we need to create our own standard, and there's a very specific directory structure that we have to follow, which I did not think was very obvious from reading this here, or from just glancing at it. Let's be fair. So what we're going to do is all sniffs in PHP CodeSniffer must belong to a coding standard. Coding standard is a directory with a specific subdirectory structure and a rule set XML file. So we can create one very easily. Let's call our coding standard my standard, run the following. Right? So this is what it's looking for. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here and I'm going to say new folder. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this eightfold coding standards. Okay, so we're going to create that folder, eightfold coding standards. No big deal. And then inside of that we need to create a sniffs directory. So we're going to say new folder, sniffs, and as this coding standard directory sits outside the main PHP CodeSniffer directory structure, PHP CodeSniffer will not know that it's installed, so we have to do something to install it. So let's go ahead, and I want you guys to see this. So I'm going to open up, I shouldn't do that. So Command Shift P, I'm going to go to Terminus, and I'm going to open default shell and panel. And it looks like I need to fix my color scheme, but that's not as important as what we're working on right now. So cd da, 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 da. So if we do vendor bin php cs -i, we're asking for what's installed, or what's installed. So you can see pairs end PSR2, MySource, Squiz, PSR1, and PSR12. And what we want to do is we want to have eightfold CS in there. Oh, and I skipped a step, sorry. So new file, and that file is an XML file that says ruleset.xml. Ruleset.xml. Now it says it's required, but I'm not really sure why. So for right now, I am just going to put that in there and see if it works. So there's that. So command line, if you want your standard to be shown as installed, create the my standard directory inside the install. My standard directory represents our coding. See, I don't want to do that. Okay. Right, like, so what they're talking about in the wiki is basically, okay, so you come in to vendor, Squiz Labs, and if we want it to be shown as installed, then we come down here to the standards directory and put that folder there. But of course, if we update this or anything like that could end up disappearing. And so we don't want to do that. Instead, we want to point PHP CS to that. And maybe that's the only way to do it. So I asked the question here, and I got a different response than what's in the wiki. And so here, yep, config set installed paths, and then we're going to do that. Okay. Like I said, in the last video, I had issues trying to get this to work. So config set installed paths. Now, the next thing that we've got to do is we've got to put in the path to the repo root. Now, the thing with the installed paths is that if we want it to be relative, it has to be relative to where PHP CodeSniffer is installed, right? So go back down here, vendor, Squiz Labs, PHP CodeSniffer. So this is where we're trying to go, or what we're trying to be relative to, not the root of the actual project. So we go up one, so dot dot forward slash, and then we go up two, dot dot forward slash, and then we go to eightfold CS. Now, you might have noticed in the PHP CS.xml, I put in the rule set name as eightfold. I'm going to go ahead and put in a name here as well, because, like I said, it's a little bit awkward, because what you're going to see is installed is not eightfold. So eightfold CS, that's the directory that we're going for, and if I hit enter, using config file, added successfully, right? So now if we do the I thing again, we should see somewhere in here or not. So up once, up twice, eightfold CS. Hey, the directory that contains the source subdirectory. Okay, maybe we need to have a source subdirectory. So I'm going to create an src folder. I'm going to move the sniffs to the src folder, and we're going to try this again. Config set installed up twice 8-fold CS. Users, Josh, public string 17, vendor Squiz Labs, PHP CodeSniffer, conf. Config value installed paths updated successfully. Old value was NOT. And see the what else am I missing? Because these were really good rules. We'll get to that later. Register your external standard with PHP CS using for the project for which you want your standard. File and add 8-fold standard rule. Run PHP. Yeah. So by default, CodeSniffer will look inside its own source standards directory to find installed coding standards. An installed standard appears when you use the -i command line argument and can be referenced using the editor standard command line. You can add install paths by setting the install path configurations options. Note, if you want to use relative paths, ensure they begin with ./eg./path, or PHP CodeSniffer will assume the path is absolute. Relative paths should always be defined relative to the top-level PHP CodeSniffer install directory, i.e. the directory that contains the source subdirectory. Okay, so it's the source subdirectory of the composer install. So I'm going to go ahead and move that back out, and I'm going to delete this folder. And I'm actually just going to rename this to 8-fold, maybe the or 8-fold CS. Maybe the fact that it was a number was throwing things off. Yeah. Alright, so this is the root. So 1 up and then 2 up gets us to string end root 8-fold CS. Alright, so config 8-fold CS. Says it was updated successfully. But it was not. Where is this folder? CodeSniffer, Squiz Labs, CodeSniffer. I'm going to try one thing before I try another thing. No, I guess we had to go 3. So 1, 2. Oh, yeah, because we actually have to go from the conf, where the conf file is, I guess. All right, so we got that working. So it found our thing. So that's good. But notice it's using the directory name. It's not actually using the name that's in the rule set. So I do find that a little weird, and I really don't know that we need that there. I suppose if we wanted to say PSR 12 inside of our own rule set, maybe that is what it is. So we're going to say rule ref eightfold, right? And so the question becomes, how do we know that it's working? So this is the method declaration. And so what we're going to do is we're going to create our own sniff real fast just to get there. So sniffs folder, oops, let's go into standards, PSR 12, that sniffs, and it's actually, no, it's not in 12, it's in PSR 2, sniffs, methods, method declaration. Right. And this is sort of what we're looking for. So I'm going to do a quick search, custom sniff. And I'm actually going to put GitHub, because I think, was it bmitch? Look at the test real quick. Yeah, I think they had the best, they had a good testing setup, so I'm going to probably use that one. So sniff and file, and that's so we can put that there. Borrow those two. Come up here to eightfold coding standards, sniffs, and I'm going to say file and call this abstract final and static. And that's because that's actually the name of the section inside of PSR 12. So we're going to say this is PHP. We're going to give it a namespace. Oh, sorry. Let me make that bigger for you. Give it a namespace, which is eightfold coding standard. Oh, that should be a backslash. See, this is very helpful. Coding standard, what error am I causing now? Oh. Yeah. So use those two things. I am not going to change their names because that's what as means. Basically, it says, how are you going to reference this thing? Class. Oh, so from the conversations that I had in GitHub, the suffix of sniff.php is supposedly a thing, or supposedly a big deal. So I'm just going to go with that because I'm not trying to experiment right now. So this extends sniff, right? or no, snif is an interface, and so basically we need to register. So public function register. That's one of the methods in the interface, and then it's not going to be T class, it's going to be T function, and then public function, and we're going to process, and this is going to be of the type file, and then you get a stack pattern. So if we do that and then come down here, we should be able to say PHP CS file add error, and we're going to this is custom. Then we come up here and let's just go ahead and run it. Let's see what we get. Oh, at least one file, right? So we're going to, I can't remember if I need to go up or anything, but strphp. Squizlads. Uncut argument count too few. Oh, right. So add error actually takes a fair amount of things. So we need the message, we need to pass in the stack pointer, and why are they putting in class? Let's come up here. I'm going to go to file real quick. CodeSniffer file. Find add error. Oh, yeah, add error. So code. Documentation reads that code is a violation code unique to the snif message. So I'm just going to, I like the idea of putting in class, I think. And we know it's working. And the reason that I say I know it's working is because as soon as I hit save on that, every function has an error, right? Every function is going to have an error, and it's going to be, this is custom, right? This is custom. So we know that our rule set is, or rather our standard, right? Because you have to build a standard, is being used. We know that, yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all we really need to know. Is that it is being used. So I can close that out. I'm not going to close this out because we still got to actually implement this, and we'll see about doing that in the next video. But I do want to set up a test environment for this so we can make that a thing. So we know that's working. Let's go ahead and close vendor as well. And yeah, we can start building our own rules for this sort of thing. And sorry, I'm starting to solution about what to do for the testing environment. All right, so we've got it set up. It's giving us feedback, which is awesome. And we're going to start building our next rule in the next go. or in the next video. And hopefully this sort of gives you a much shorter introduction into setting your project up to be able to create your own standard for coding or coding styles. As always, thank you for making the time. Really do appreciate it, and I'll see you around.